Greetings, Seriously Planners. Happy International Literacy Day. Belated International Literacy Day, that is. To celebrate, I wanted to share with you 7 of my favorite books from this July and August that I've read. All the books I've been reading are linked on and described on my Goodreads account, which I'll link down below. But instead of boring you with all the bad books, I wanted to share with you the 7 best. So to begin, my first favorite books is Why Not Me by Mindy Kaling. This book is fantastic. I'm not a Mindy Kaling fan, really. Haven't really watched The Office before, haven't read her first book of essays, haven't really watched The Mindy Project, but I picked up her second book and was pleasantly surprised with how fabulous this book is. It is a collection of essays that talks about everything from finding love to the impossible standards of beauty in Hollywood, to struggling with body image, to trying to figure out what it is you want to do in the world. All these things are described in the book, and I found it a really refreshingly honest, funny collection of essays. And my favorite parts of the book is when she describes body image. And so she talks about how she wakes up in the morning, she doesn't really like the way she looks. She's tried juice fast, she's tried cleanses, she's tried working out, and some of the stuff has worked, but it always leaves her feeling not that great about herself. And that's something I felt, that struggle with body issues or body image. And I know that's something that other friends of mine have struggled with. And as I was sharing quotes and chapters and snippets of this book, that was the stuff that really resonated with me and resonated with friends of mine. So for that alone, just hearing her reflections and her honesty and vulnerability around body image, this book is worth it, but the entire collection is worth it because there's so much great stuff she has to share. The second book I read, this is a nonfiction book called Contagious by Jonah Berger, I think his name is. And this book I loved. It's about why ideas spread. Why is it that we talk about some things or share certain videos on Facebook and we don't share other things? And he uses this acronym called STEPS, which you'll have to read the book to find out exactly what each of those letters mean. But it was a really interesting book that talks about the characteristics of ideas that we share. So sometimes things are emotional. Sometimes they have practical value. Sometimes they are connected to things that trigger us to share with others. Sometimes they are just interesting things that we share with others to fill in those awkward silences at parties when we want to have something interesting to share, but we don't really have anything interesting that we can think of, and so we just think of the last thing we've watched or read. And if you're thinking about why ideas spread, or you have an idea of your own or a business of your own that you're trying to spread to others, this book is really interesting to just figure out the mechanics of what shareability is. The third book is called The Blue Between Sky and Water by Susan Abulhawa. This is a book about a Palestinian family in Palestine and in the U.S., and it starts from 1948 and goes through generations. It's a multi-generational family of women. So there is the grandmother, there is the daughter, there is the granddaughter, and this book traces what happens to them. And it is awful at times reading the story of this family. It like rends your heart. You're crying. You just want to throw the book away and say, I can't actually find out what is the next awful thing that happens to them. But the book is written so beautifully and so intricately that you are pulled back into the story and you want to know that these women are okay. This book is an extraordinary tale of Palestinian resilience. It's an extraordinary tale of strong, vibrant, fierce women. And it's an extraordinary story of what Palestinian life looks like in 48 and 68 and 78 and beyond, and what the atrocities in one place mean across decades and across continents when people move, and the family trauma that they still have with them affects them in their life in another continent. So it's just beautiful. I love this book. It's very unusual for me to read a book that has pain and torture and so much awfulness, if for lack of a better word, in it. But this book just is special, and I hope everyone reads it. It pays off in the end. You go through pain and then you feel good at the end of the book. The fourth book is A Beginner's Guide of Acting English by Shappi Khorsandi. Shappi is one of the UK's finest and funniest female comics. I've watched her stand up before, and when I saw her book at the local library, I was absolutely over the moon and knew I had to read it. And the book doesn't disappoint. It's about her experience of moving from Iran to the UK and what that experience was like. And what's extraordinary with this book is it's told from a child's perspective. So you see her as a 6-year-old trying to figure out why people are calling her Abaki in the UK. And it's her trying to figure out what is happening in Iran and what is this revolution everyone is talking about, and why are her uncles being tortured, and what is happening to her family, and why is her mother crying all the time. And so you see racism from a child's perspective, you see Iran from a child's perspective, the food, the textures, the vibrancy, the family life. And because it's from that perspective of a child, it's really, really funny, it's really emotional, and it's just very different from any other book that I've read before. So those two books, Shappi Khorsand's book and Mindy Kaling's book, are two very funny memoirs by women of color, but very, very funny for very different ways. And both of them are books that have captured me this summer. The fifth book is a poetry collection called Milk and Honey by Rupi, Kaur, a Canadian poet that I've wanted to read for a long time, have heard a lot about, have watched interviews with her, and was really curious what her poetry collection that I've heard so much about really is like. And the book, again, does not disappoint. It's separated into 4 sections: the hurting, the loving, the breaking, and the healing. And each section has poems about different things. It talks about sexual abuse, it talks about love, it talks about loving oneself, it talks about body image and feeling empty, and all these different themes that are very raw and open and vulnerable. And it feels like the book is, or her chapbook is really her opening herself up for people to learn and heal from. And I don't know how else to describe this chapbook except to say it is exceptional. It is something that if other poetry collections are like this, I definitely want to read more poetry in the future. The last couple of books are books that I have actually done reviews on before, so I will link those reviews down below. The 6th one is called An Imperfect Blessing by Nadia. This is a book about a Cape Town family in apartheid time and right after apartheid ends. It is an exceptional book. It's one of my favorite books that I've ever read. I wax poetic about it in the video that is just devoted to this book. I just did an interview with Nadia a couple of weeks ago that will be on my blog shortly about the writing process of this book and why this book was so special to her, and just exploring some of the themes of the book more. So I really hope you check that out when it's out, and get a copy for everyone you know, because this book it's magic. The last book is Before We Visit the Goddess by Chitra and Divakaruni. I've also done a review of this book. It is a book about very, very strong women, about a resilient family, and again is a book that I've talked about with great excitement in a different video. So I will leave you to watch that and link that down below. So those are 7 books that I've read this summer if you're in BC and the rest of Canada, or the winter if you're in Joburg or the rest of Southern Africa. And books that I've loved and I highly recommend. Most of them are by women of color. Mostly all of them talk about resilient families and resilient women. And all of them are books that I've really loved this summer.